Alright, so there's been a lot of inquiries about the jury trial that I was involved in recently. Sentencing, of course, was the other day. The right of allocution, all that stuff. The last thing they want me doing is squawking and talking in a courtroom because I just make too many poignant motherfucking points. For example, the court lacking jurisdiction for insufficient pleadings. Alright? They don't have sufficient pleadings to allege criminal activity because they don't have a plaintiff making a general appearance before the court, independently bonded with sworn testimony, willing to be deposed and claim and state the harm, damage, and loss that I caused them, alright? But that's irrelevant. They don't want to hear that shit because they know damn good and well they ain't got it, which means they brought fraud upon the court. They don't want to hear about federal rules of civil procedure, Rule 11B, which is what they are bound to follow because the Bar Association has agreed to follow the federal rules of civil procedure as well as agreed to be compliant with the IRS. So they don't want to hear about Title 26, 2603, 2602, 2001, 2002. Anybody in constructive possession of decedent estate property is liable for the transfer taxes on a carryover basis. They don't want to hear that shit, okay? They don't want to hear that the judge, the alleged judge, or the actor acting as a judge or a ministerial administrator is liable for a taxable determination because of the order they create. Remember, he who provides the ends provides the fucking means. They don't want to hear that shit either. So, I mean, I could go on for days and days and days and days about this, but what I found was funny is there were some people that contacted me yesterday. They said, Derek, you're all over the radio. They were placating to the American people how they gave you multiple opportunities to remedy this situation. I said, yeah, they're trying to save face because they don't want the American people to be pissed off. They don't want the people to feel that the judicial system has failed them amidst all the other chaos that's going on with this scamdemic bullshit that's really about bonds and monies sent to the municipalities and school systems and everything else for enforcing this ludicrous shit, okay? And they know they're on the cusp of a civil war. And I don't think it will be a civil war where guns, bullets, hand grenades will be utilized. I think it's a civil war of the battle of the wits, the battle of the people gaining knowledge and saying, we're not complying anymore, which scares them more than an actual physical war, a physical battle. What scares them most is just people going, fuck you, we're done, fuck you. And that's the most powerful thing that they're afraid of, is people actually standing up going, goodbye, have a nice day, don't give a fuck what you have to say, all right? Thou hast seen a farmer's dog bark at a beggar, and the creature run from the cure. There thou mightst behold the great image of authority, a dog's obeyed in office. William Shakespeare. All right. So let's just talk about the first encounter you're really going to have with any government official in most instances is going to be a police officer. And you have to understand their mindset and mentality. All right. The most visible member of the system and the first one you will ever come in contact with as a cop, he isn't always recognizable as such because it is a state of mind rather than his clothes which makes him what he is. His ambition to control the behavior of other people, he lacks imagination and tends to think in a linear fashion, so he usually relies upon rules to solve everything. In this respect, he has much the same mentality as religious zealot. Indeed, many cops are religious in addition to being legalistic. They believe that the world is in conflict between absolute of right and wrong, and that rules exist for the purpose of sustaining the triumph of the right over the wrong. Whether these rules are God's or the government's, the cop sees it as his duty to enforce them. And that's something that's funny as well. They never mentioned on the radio the wrestling match between me and two officers in the middle of the courtroom. They never mentioned that at all on the radio. Why is that? Why aren't there more charges for resisting arrest or defying a direct order from a judge? They don't ever mention that on the radio. How is that? Why is that? Could it be that insurrection and seditious behavior is unbecoming of both of these political parties and their establishments, and by publicly announcing that they're actually denying a man to speak and his right of allocution is actually a violation of due process of law? Could it be that they actually were engaged in criminal activity and they don't want to draw attention to the fact that there was actually a physical confrontation between me and two agents and agency in the middle of the courtroom? And who touched who first? Assault and battery, without cause, without order, without a written order or a warrant stating that I was to be incarcerated. Just some man that on a whim says, all right, that's it, get him out of here. You can assault him and batter him and touch him all you want. Well, no, you can't. And so they don't tell that to the public on the radio, how some man from the bench wearing a dress like an asshole decides to tell two other men that it's okay and acceptable to touch another man where he doesn't want to be touched or when he doesn't want to be touched, because they can't overcome the logical conversation that the man brings to the table. So what does a brute always resort to? An overzealous asshole always resort to? Physical violence and force. That's the rule of government. If we can't convince you, then we're just going to beat you, all right? Or we're going to have some gun-toting moron who doesn't know the law put his hands on you, and he will carry the full liability for assault and battery. Organized government holds the championship title for rulemaking, so it's not surprising that this kind of person would be attracted to it for a livelihood. He's deeply impressed by the government's status as dominant authority in our society, and he's likely to attribute the quality of justness to its rules simply on the basis alone. When asked why he puts his support behind the establishment, he's likely to reply, because it's the law. What he's actually doing is aligning himself with what he perceives to be a winning side. He chooses establishment government to join up with so that he can share in the security that comes from the legitimacy and prevailing balance of power that it holds. Cops tend to have fragile egos, and it's very important to them that their pride be continually bolstered and stroked. Police work meets this need by clothing them with the government's authority, and instantly the cop becomes far more powerful than he could have ever hoped to be on his own merits. The fact that the authority he wields is actually the government's and not his own is unimportant to him. For all outward appearances, he's the boss. Sometimes he can use the government's authority to further his own personal interest, and at other times he must be content to exercise the authority for the sole interest of the government. Either way, however, he derives satisfaction from being the man and reaffirming his prestigious self-image. Cops hardly ever get rich because they spend their lives doing the footwork necessary to make other people's rules work. Those other people, the movers and the shakers, who are the brains behind the power structure of society, are real beneficiaries of the cops' labor. They make the rules, and the rules serve their interests. They set the system up so that it provides the cop with a decent living in return for his service. But the economic reality is that he's strictly hired help. Unless he can get a hustle going on the side or somehow work his way up into politics, a cop will never get much financial reward from his job. Very few of them have enough originality or ambition to turn a police job into something lucrative. The rare entrepreneur might succeed by putting his police skills onto the commercial marketplace, as Alan Pinkerton and William J. Burns have done. But most ambitious cops attempt to further their careers via the political route. They get a law degree, go to work for the local prosecutor's office, and attempt to build a reputation by convicting people of crimes. The more people they send to prison and the more newsworthy the cases are, the better the press coverage is for them. Thus, with sufficient publicity, political shrewdness, and gullible electorate, and ambitious cops can claw his way to up into public office and become one of the rule makers himself. As you may have already noticed, the term cop is being used in a very inclusive manner. Policemen are cops, to be sure, but there are many other types of cops, too. Once you realize this and learn to recognize them as the threats that they are, you'll have neutralized one of their most potent weapons, the element of surprise. Think of cops as being of two basic types, the professional and the amateurs. Professional cops are in police and security work as a full-time vocation and may be either governmentally or privately employed. At the lowest rung of the government are the municipal cops, notably the police and the fire department. City police, the boys in blue, are the most visible of all cops, since they patrol the streets in uniform. Their brothers in the fire department, however, shouldn't be underestimated. Just because firemen aren't primarily concerned with crime, they work closely with the police. In fact, fire inspectors are the ones who are in charge of arson investigations. Moreover, firemen are often likely to come across contraband and other evidence while putting out a fire. Their mentality and sympathies are basically the same as the police. At the next trier of government, the county and the state level, there's a massive profusion of cops doing the government's work. The most important ones are the state police and county sheriff's department and their respective state and county attorney's office. These are the cops that handle most of the felony prosecutions. The prosecutors are sometimes referred to as district attorneys, DAs, and their big boss is the state attorney general, although the governor is technically the top executive officer of the state. Other cops at this level of government include those of the coroner's office, tax office, health department, and forest service, to name a few. On the federal levels, we find a further plethora of cops, what we'll henceforth refer to in this book as the feds. Some of the better known agencies include the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF, Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, Secret Service, Marshal Service, Postal Inspectors, Internal Revenue Service, IRS, Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, Federal Communications Commission, FCC, and National Park Services. Looking out for our national frontiers are the Coast Guard, Border Patrol, Bureau of Customs and Immigration, and Naturalization Services. We mustn't forget the military either. The armed forces are the country's police force on the international level. Of particular significance are the spy outfits such as the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and National Security Agency, NSA, as well as the various internal police agencies within the Department of the Defense, military police, OSI, etc. Other countries, of course, have their own equivalents of all these officers. There's also a non-governmental organization called Interpol, which helps the government cops of different countries to coordinate their efforts on the worldwide scale. Private employed cops should generally be recognized within two basic categories: those of the private sector and those who conduct certain business services. The private sector refers to all manner of police and security type jobs which are hired commercially. Private investigators, detectives, and guard agencies, insurance investigators, and private industrial watchmen make up this category. These jobs usually require government licensing, and they are often filled by ex-government cops. Skip tracers, bounty hunters, and repossessors occupy the lower echelon of the private sector. They provide the muscle for the tracking down welchers, bail jumpers, and unpaid for vehicles for the benefit of the private concerns which have a financial interest in them. Various business services, notably credit bureaus, computer services, and informational services, also represent a category of private cops. Their low visibility and the subtlety of their police functions make it inapparent to most people that these are indeed cops. They compile vast files of information on you and make it available to insurance companies, private concerns, and the government. And any of which can use it against you. Amateur cops are ordinary people who get involved in police work without making their living off of it. They're often simply public-spirited citizens who are goaled into aiding the police by virtue of their good nature, desire to help people. Some of them are numbers of organizations such as the Boy Scouts, Civil Air Patrol, JCs, and radio hams, which incidentally happens to support the police. Others are police groupies who hang around law enforcement agencies in order to satisfy a psychological need. In many places, the police have actually solicited senior citizens, youth, and other folks with spare time on their hands for their participation in police auxiliary groups. They put the volunteers to work doing repetitive or unskilled tasks so that the paid police can be freed up of other duties. In some localities, the amateur cops are organized into block watchers, patrols which drive around with walkie-talkies, reporting on anything suspicious that they happen to see. Moralistic and often prejudiced, the police groupie tends to suffer from an exaggeration of all the worst qualities of the cop mentality. The zealous species of amateur cop, and the only one who might occasionally turn a profit from his activity, is the informer. He's known colloquially by a variety of names: snitch, rat, stoolie, squealer, and the police refer to him these days as a CI, confidential informant, or cooperative individual. He runs to the authorities with incriminating information that he learns from his friends and associates. He's usually prompted to such betrayal by one of the 5 motives: moralistic indignation, i.e., why should he get away with that? 2, revenge. 3, desire to eliminate competition. 4, hope of reward. And 5, fear of either the person he's snitching on or of police extortion. The snitch is the single most powerful tool that the police have. Through his assistance, there have been more undetectable crimes disclosed, more unbreakable cases broken, and more invulnerable suspects convicted than by all the combined technologies of the law enforcement arsenal. Professional cops exploit this valuable resource by appealing to the 5 snitching motives wherever and whenever they can, always hoping to develop a new source. The government cops create many of their snitches by extorting cooperation from the people they have caught but have refrained from filing charges against. Junkies are particularly vulnerable to this ploy because the prospect of even a minor bust is a nightmare for someone who's physically dependent on narcotics. A chilling illustration of the significance of a snitch is the trial of Irish Republican Army IRA suspect, which began on May 8th of 1984 at a Belfast Crown Court in Northern Ireland. A single informer named Raymond Gilmore was responsible for bringing down 39 people up on 190 charges, ranging from helping an illegal organization to murder in our country. It's more common for the police to refrain from even identifying their informers, much less bringing them into court to testify. They prefer to keep them out there working in the community until they are either discovered and killed or no longer useful. Nobody really likes or respects the snitch, not even the police. He's merely an effective tool for them to use up and discard. Bearing in mind their different perspectives, we can now briefly discuss what the various cops intend to accomplish by their activities. Amateurs are ostensibly involved in police work to provide a service to mankind. If motives are honestly appraised, however, it's usually the satisfaction of a personal psychological need which they are really out to achieve. In the case of an informant, the purpose is to satisfy his indignation, revenge, jealousy, greed, or fear. Amateur cops can snoop around and perform a variety of auxiliary tasks, but invariably they must get their objectives accomplished through the police, since they have no real authority of their own. Private cops are out to protect their interest of their paying clients or employers. They're the only ones who actually are out to accomplish their stated purpose. There may be secondary benefits such as ego satisfaction, but the profit motive is their principal driving force. They snoop, develop data, files on people, and collect evidence for their clients' use. They track down missing persons and things. They stand guard over property and transport valuable cargoes. Unlike the amateur cops, they are usually authorized to carry guns and use them, and they can get down to business on the physical level if it is necessary. Government cops are purportedly out to take care of citizens, to serve and protect. As the police motto claims, their real purpose, however, is something which few of them ever consciously think about. It has nothing to do with making right triumph over wrong. Their true mission is to protect the status quo for the benefit of the ruling class. A few outrageously powerful concerns own most of the wealth of this country and indirectly control most of what they don't own. The legal machinery, which consists of the courts and lawmaking bodies, is part of that controlled realm. Laws are created by the legislator and interpreted by the courts so that the interest of the controlling powers are best served. Naturally, they consistently process the laws in their own best interest as well. A complex system of prerogative has thus been created, whereby the lion's share of the wealth and power is retained by the elite, and the generous portion are allowed to filter down within privileged circles. The bulk of the population, those middle-class working folks whose labor has generated all this wealth, are lucky if they get enough to make ends meet. The poor get a few bones to chew on. Many of the middle-class folks, including the cops, occupy government jobs. These jobs don't generate any wealth at all. Government regulates it. It does not create or produce anything. Ultimately, then, all the government parasites and elitist fat cats are supported by the overburdened working stiff who consequently finds himself staring blankly at his empty hand and wondering where all the money has gone. Some plausible explanation is in order to assuage his discontentment. Enter the poor man, crude and scantily educated. He fails to communicate well with middle-class people. He's culturally and socially a world apart from them, and he lives in a place where they wouldn't go in broad daylight. They cannot understand or emphasize with him, and it's only a one-step journey to go from ignorance to hatred. They are prepared to believe the worst about him, and the worst is what they hear. Reports come pouring out of the government agencies, raising the hue and cry that crime is on the rise in America. Newspaper headlines in the 6 o'clock news broadcast graphic stories of murders and mayhem on the streets. Politicians pontificate about cleaning up crime and bringing back the good old days. Movies and television programs dramatically portray innocent citizens being brutally assaulted by grotesque-looking thugs. And who are the thugs that receive all this bad press? You guessed it. It's the ghetto people. Like the Jews, who provided Hitler with a convenient scapegoat for rallying the support of the German people, the urban poor in America supply our government with the, albeit, need to rationalize its excess to the middle class. Police, courts, lawyers, and prison generate vast expenses which must be paid for in order to control the ghetto menaces. Under the pervasive effects of established inspired propaganda, the working folks are convinced that their tax money is being wisely used in the worthwhile cause of protecting them from their lower class enemies, with their resentment and blame diverted against the poor. They offer no resistance to the real crooks, who continue to fleece them openly and legitimately under the guise of government need. To make good their function of protecting the status quo, the police work toward two principal objectives: getting the lawbreakers out of circulation and deterring the populace from violating the law. They usually succeed in the first objective by getting the citizen into court, where he's convicted and sentenced to prison. In the case of the foreigner, an alternative approach is to have him deported out of the country. Sometimes the police get to exercise a third option by killing the suspect while apprehending him. By the use of the deterrence, the police can exert their control over the entire population rather than just the few individuals who actually get caught breaking the law. Most of the citizenry can easily be intimidated into cooperating with the government because they don't want to risk upsetting their own little status quo. Jobs, reputations, possessions, and freedoms can readily be compromised by the government. When the usual citizen decides that he's not going to be intimidated and openly defies the government, he's likely to be vigorously pursued until he's either reformed or eliminated. An old farmer named Gordon Cowell was such a fellow. He refused to pay income tax, and when the usual police harassment failed to rehabilitate him, he was goaded into armed resistance, hunted down, and executed, John Dillinger style. 2/3. Like the private ones, government cops spend much of their time snooping, developing data files, and collecting evidence. Sometimes they'll work in secrecy for years before they are ready to bring charges against a suspect. Police budgingly and wiretapping of American citizens reached its peak in 1971, then saw a temporary decrease in the wake of the Watergate scandal, with 208 authorized taps in 1983. However, a 60% increase over the previous years. The feds have returned to their record level of activity and promise to go much higher. Most of this surveillance relates to narcotics investigations and is directed against single-family homes, although each phone tap eavesdropped on an average of 147 people. The feds admitted that only 16% of the conversations were incriminating. All this surveillance is quite expensive. Each one of the warranted taps done in 1983 cost the taxpayer an average of $65,300 on wiretapping operations alone. That of Catherine Bowden, who was being investigated for a 1981 Brinks truck robbery, involved 50 cops and cost $2 million. All these figures represent authorized wiretaps. Of course, the extent of unauthorized electronic surveillance in America is many times greater. Police spend a sizable portion of their time these days setting up crimes of their own so they can bust whoever is willing to participate with them. They impersonate buyers and sellers of drugs, stolen goods, prostitution, murder contracts, bribes, or anything else that's illegal. The Abscam and DeLorean investigations are well-known examples of this type of scam. The FBI alone conducted 316 such probes during 1983, and they have earmarked $12.5 million for undercover work in 1984. Legislators have been worried about this sort of police activity since it's often directed at their own lily white necks instead of at a lowly bunch of ghetto tramps. Following the lead of the Senate Select Committee, which deliberated on the subject in 1982, the Democratic majority of the House Subcommittee recently recommended that the cops be required to get a warrant before launching a secret probe. It's unlikely that there will be any such legislation in the near future, however, and for the time being, everyone is fair game for an undercover sting. Aside from their spying and trapping activities, the police are capable of a variety of other dishonorable things that the ordinary citizen doesn't realize. The author can testify from personal experience that they will falsify physical evidence and coach witnesses to tell lies in order to assure that their criminal prosecution will result in conviction. They occasionally carry around small quantities of dope to plant on people in order to create the pretext for an excuse to hold them. Some of them even keep an untraceable handgun in their squad car in case that they shoot someone who turns out to be unarmed. They throw down guns. The throwdown gun is simply tossed near the body so that the officer can easily vindicate himself by claiming that he had shot in self-defense. Once the police have enough evidence to justify bringing charges against somebody, they go through a litany of legal procedures which culminates in the suspect's trial. First, they file a complaint with the grand jury, and it in turn issues an indictment, the formal charge. Based on the indictment, a judge then issues a warrant authorizing them to arrest the person. They can skip the grand jury if they want to, and the judge will still give them their warrant, but then they have to issue their own version of the indictment, which is called an information. With an information, the cops are generally required to give their suspect the benefit of the preliminary hearing or prelim, wherein the judge must determine whether there's probable cause to believe that he's guilty. The cops generally prefer to avoid this, since it gives the suspect a chance to block their prosecution. A grand jury indictment, on the other hand, is particularly a sure thing. With their warrant in hand, the cops are ready to arrest their man if they have probable cause to believe that he is guilty of a crime. They can arrest him without a warrant and do the paperwork later. Either way, the arrest that follows is standard operating procedure, which is familiar to all TV viewers. They inform the suspect that he's under arrest, read him his rights, frisk him for weapons, put him in handcuffs, and cart him off to jail. This is the ultimate high for a cop, especially if he has an audience. In one dramatic and glorious spectacle, it gives expression to everything that holds purpose for him in his life. Now, I want to skip ahead, because we don't talk about lawyers here. And this book was gifted to me the other day, and I just kind of briefly skimmed through it, and I found it interesting. This is what Socrates had to say about lawyers, all right? And this is 400 BC. He has practiced deception and retaliation and has become stunned and warped. And so he has passed out of youth into manhood, having no soundness in him, and is now, as he thinks, a master in wisdom. Such is the lawyer. And let's see what other people had to say about lawyers. Now keep in mind, that was from 400 AD. Jesus Christ, 31 AD, woe to you lawyers also, for you load men with burdens hard to bear, and you yourselves not touch the burdens with one of your fingers. Then we have Jonathan Swift in 1727. You have clearly proved that ignorance, idleness, and vice are the proper ingredients for qualifying a legislator, that laws are best explained, interpreted, and applied by those whose interest and abilities lie in perverting, confounding, and eluding them. Oliver Goldsmith, 1768. Lawyers are always more ready to get a man into trouble than out of trouble. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, 1820. He saw a lawyer killing a viper on a dunghill hard by his own stable, and the devil smiled, for it put him in mind of Cain and his brother Abel. Henry Peter, Lord Brougham, 1840. A learned gentleman who rescues your estate for your enemies and keeps it to himself. That's the definition of a lawyer. Oscar Wilde, 1890. Lawyers have been known to wrest from reluctant juries triumphant verdicts or acquittal for their clients, even when those clients, as often happens, were clearly and unmistakably innocent. Carl Sandburg, 1930. Why is there always a secret signing when a lawyer cashes in? Why does a hearsay horse snicker hauling a lawyer away? Grace Hibbard, An Honest Lawyer book just out. What can the author have to say? Reprint perhaps of ancient tome, a work of fiction anyway. The job of the court is to air both sides of the controversy and let the judge resolve it according to what the written law says, of which he professes to be the expert. There are big laws such as the Constitution, medium-sized laws such as statutes, and small laws such as case law that the courts themselves create. When there's a conflict between them, the bigger law is supposed to take precedent over the smaller one, and the party backed by the bigger law wins over his adversary. That's the way it's supposed to be anyway. In practice, the courts generally do their utmost to rule in favor of the government, even when the individual has the bigger law in his corner. They do this by twisting their reading of the law, a process known as construction, so that they can make it seem to say what they want it to say. They see nothing wrong with straining the words and stretching the meanings of the law when it suits their purpose. They are all for playing by the rules as long as the government wins. But when those rules sustain the individual citizen, the courts claim that it's not a game anymore, so they don't have to recognize them. That dualistic black and white mentality that's so characteristic of a cop is at the bottom of this attitude. As one Supreme Court cop revealed, they see themselves as being charged with the twin purposes of the conviction of the guilty and the vindication of the innocent, and to the judge, from recent rulings, the functional corollary to this iron heel principle is that the end justify the means. We'll talk to you guys soon. I hope this helps you out a little bit. Just wanted to keep you in touch. I've got some traveling to do. We're still working on bringing kids home from CPS that were abducted. That violates the law. I want to say it's 13818, Executive Order 13818, human trafficking. And so that's what I'll be doing over the next few weeks, is working my little ass off on that. We brought a claim in federal court trying to get these offspring brought back to their rightful mother and father. And it's just egregious to me that these people profess to uphold the law all while violating it and absconding from enforcing it. And it's absolutely egregious. Human trafficking is a very real issue, and the biggest human trafficker in the world is, in fact, the governments of the world. They are the largest human traffickers, period, bar none. There is no greater human trafficker in the world, the trafficker of children in the world, than the United States government. Point blank and simple. Your municipalities, your states, they're all involved in it at the highest levels. They're all reaping monetary gain from it, unjust enrichment, and they should all be sent to Guantanamo fucking Bay. That's the fact. So thank you for joining me. Thanks for all your support. I'll be filing an appeal. Of course, there's a number of other documents that have to be filed on the case that I was just involved in. I'm also contacting the SEC, the OIG, the IRS, the FTC, the DTC, about all the securities generated from that one case that they want to try and hide and act like they don't know what I'm talking about. I know damn good and well what I'm talking about. It's the rules that you have to abide by when you're negotiating negotiable instruments such as securities found in UCC 8 and your private ad hoc for-profit corporations that aren't government. They're not tax exempt, and I'm not going to let you walk away with the fucking securities, because this is about principles and sound doctrine. This is about keeping you guys fucking honest. And if you go to jail for it, well, so fucking be it. I warned you before I walked out of that court what I was going to do. And if your dumbasses aren't going to cut me the check for my property, my rights, titles, interest, dividends, derivatives, debentures, sediments, general tangibles, general intangibles, child security, trust residual, trust residue, rents, profits, and proceeds, well, then your ass gets stuck with a fucking taxable determination, and you get stuck with paying the capital gains taxes on those securities, annuities, and futures. Fuck you.